Welcome back, Test 5, Part 2. We just talked about classical conditioning, and remember classical conditioning was Pavlov's dog. Fed the dog salivated. Rang the bell and fed the dog salivated. Rang the bell, the dog salivated without eating, so the new stimuli became ringing the bell. Well, there's two types of conditioning. We really examine this, especially next semester, in abnormal psychology. Once again, we've talked about this a little bit last video. Really a big thing for abnormal is what causes you to do what you do. So we have classical conditioning, that's without thinking. Classical conditioning, we ring the bell, the dog doesn't think, oh, the bell reminds me of food, oh, I salivate when I eat, so once again, classical conditioning is without thinking. Operant conditioning, your actions are determined by consequences. You think to yourself, okay, if I do this, and this is going to happen, okay? So, taking a look at that, once again, let's talk about getting a ticket. A policeman comes in. If you have ever been stopped by a policeman and you've had that nervousness, or a policeman comes up, and the lights come on, and you're like, oh no, he's definitely not coming for me, and then you realize, oh, he is, and he's flashing his lights, and you pull over, and you're like, oh goodness. And then all of a sudden the policeman comes up to your door and he wants your license and your registration and your heart's beating and everything. Then you've had the experience of getting a ticket. So if you don't want that experience again, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, now when you see a policeman, you're like, you associate a policeman with a bad experience. That's classical conditioning. But if you do it by operant conditioning, then you know, oh, I was speeding. That's the problem. The problem wasn't the policeman. The problem was I was speeding, and the result is I'm going to have a policeman pull me over, and I'm going to feel really nervous about it, and he's going to give me a ticket that's going to cost me money. So we'll talk more about operant conditioning and classical conditioning. Now, advertising is a big thing, okay? Because classical conditioning wants you to associate something without thinking. And so if you are McDonald's, you're pretty happy about classical conditioning, because as you're driving down the road and you're on vacation and you say, where do we want to eat? And you're hoping that your wife says, yeah, let's go eat at this really cool place over here. And your kids are like, oh, there's the Big M, let's go eat at McDonald's. Because why? Classical conditioning, they associate that Big M with a toy in the Happy Meal, okay? So once again, operant conditioning versus classical conditioning, we'll need to know that. We'll need to know that for our next test. So now let's move on to the 5 parts of the brain associated with psychology. So we talked about getting to this point, and we talked about having the different parts of the brain associated with different things, and how we think and how we process information. So we're going to do 5 of them here: the frontal lobe, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the basal ganglia. So really critical now. We'll stop. We'll talk about those 5 parts of the brain. First of all, the frontal lobe, as it's denoted, is really right behind your forehead. It's a large area here. I don't know if any of you, I'm not some of you may be Star Trek fans. I'm not really like a Star Trek, guru or anything, but it's kind of interesting because they make a play on that in the movie, and in the TV series there, they make, the bigger your frontal lobe, the smarter you are, okay? So they have somebody come in and they've got this big old frontal lobe, and they're like really smart because they're saying, oh, they have all this working memory and they're really smart, and then somebody comes in and their forehead's all sunken in, meaning, yeah, they're not very smart, they don't have very much working memory. So the frontal lobe, though, has to do with working memory. And working memory is everything, all the stimuli you take in. So what I hear, what I see, what I taste, what I smell, all the different things. So that working memory, can you imagine how much is going into your working memory just constantly? All the things around you that you tune out, it's all going into your working memory. Everything, every stimuli is going into the working memory, and the working memory then has to sort this out and has to determine where I'm going to go with that. Now, if it's something important, and if it's an association, something in your memory that you need to store for later, okay, all right, then the hippocampus, okay, is the long-term memory, okay, but the hippocampus is something else. It's explicit memory. Explicit memory is fascinating because explicit memory means that it's as if you were really there. Explicit memory is in color. It's in sounds. It's in sights. It's like that. It's kind of like that Kenny Chesney song. It takes me back. I walk into the gym and I smell the wooden floor. I walk out on a football field and I smell the grass and different things. So an explicit memory is kind of interesting because that's how you remember smells. Wow. Isn't that amazing? It's amazing that we can smell something and we go, oh, wow, I think that's a cheeseburger. Oh, wow, I think that somebody got sick, okay? Or, oh, wow, that's fill in the blank, okay? So that's amazing. The hippocampus has long-term memories, not just explicit memories, but all memories that are long-term. So we say, okay, well, what do we remember? We talk about not having memories till after we're 3. It's kind of interesting. Why do we say that? Because the hippocampus is not developed until we're about 3 years old. That part of the brain doesn't even develop. We can't even have long-term memories. We can't even have explicit memories. A little kid that's 2 years old can't remember what a smell is. We talked about that a little bit in Piaget, in developing everything sensory and motor. We take it all into what? The working memory. Okay, so the hippocampus, remember that? It's like a hippo. Like a hippopotamus is big and long. Okay, hippocampus, long-term memories and explicit memories. The prefrontal cortex, which is, you have the working memory here, and then back in behind the lobes, the temporal lobes of your brain, you have what's called the prefrontal cortex. That's responsible for emotions. Isn't that neat? Mad, sad, glad, happy, all of that comes from a different part of the brain. All right? So then we have, so there's our emotions. Then we have the amygdala. What a word. Amygdala. And that is your unconscious emotions. Now, the amygdala is fascinating, and make sure you can see this here. The amygdala is located in the back of your brain, okay? It's back here by the medulla oblongata that actually controls your heart and controls things that we don't have to think about. Controls your heart, controls your lungs. But the amygdala is located back in the back, so it says, okay, this is your protection. And it has unconscious emotions. So whenever there's fear, okay, and you have fear, the amygdala senses we're in danger here. Something's wrong. You need to be careful. And we call it fight or flight. So it's also where we release adrenaline and we say, oh my gosh, something's wrong here. And fight or flight means we're up against something that we're going to have to either fight or we're going to have to run. Hence the names fight or flight. And what happens in the amygdala? We sense the fear, we sense something's wrong, and then all of a sudden our heart rate gets up. We're ready to go. I mean, we're ready to run, we're ready to fight, our muscles are tightened up, we're ready to go, and our senses are super keen. And all of a sudden our vision is extra good, our hearing is extra good, and it's kind of like a jet ready for a fight. All of a sudden now we're in Top Gun mode, and we're ready to go. Heads on a swivel, we're like, okay, I'm ready. Anything comes in here, I'm going to get that sense, I'm going to get that stimuli, I'm going to take care of it. So the amygdala comes in there. So here's what happens. Sometimes we feel this fear, we don't know what's wrong, and we get nervous and our heart starts beating and different things, and the amygdala senses there's something. So what happens, okay, so then we go through, we'll talk about the basal ganglia here in a little bit, but then we go through the frontal lobe, begins going, okay, now what's causing this fear? Why do I feel something's wrong? Okay, and we begin to sort that out. Now here's the problem, and we're going to talk about stress a little bit later in this class. But here's the problem. The problem is that a lot of times our amygdala goes off and says, oh my gosh, we're in danger, get ready to fight or flight when some things happen to us in our generation, okay? Back in previous generations and different things, I don't know how many bears you run into this week, but probably not a lot. But back when early man would hunt and he would do those things, he was in a lot of danger with different things, and that amygdala would kick in, and it's natural selection. If your amygdala didn't kick in, you might get killed. So what happens now is we might even have an argument with somebody. We might even have an argument with somebody, and they say things that aren't nice to us, and we say things that aren't nice to them, and then pretty soon, it's so bad, and we're so nervous about it, that our amygdala kicks in, and all of a sudden we have fear. We're like, oh my gosh. Now, if you're in junior high, it's like, oh my gosh, they're not going to like me. Or, oh my gosh, they think this. But even as an adult, we're like, oh my gosh, this happened at work. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job. Or this didn't go good, or that didn't go good. Well, what's the problem? Why is this stressful? Because the reason this is stressful, and maybe you've had something happen where your heart rate got up, you got all sweaty, you got all nervous about a situation, and then all of a sudden your amygdala kicks in, which is your unconscious emotion, and all of a sudden it says, man, I feel in danger, I feel fear, and we got to get ready for fight or flight. Well, that's fine if you're getting chased by a bear. But that's not good if you're stressed out because you're having a communication problem, with your spouse or your best friend or your parents or your friend. Because your body then is all hyped up. So what happens? Your body's like, okay, did we solve this problem? Because I'm ready to go. I'm ready. Man, I'm ready. I'm hyped. My heart's beating. I'm ready to go. So the amygdala then, the reason we have stress is because we never get to work that off. So that's why they're saying count to 10, get out and walk and jog, do something to get your heart rate up so this amygdala says fight or flight. Now, the last one that I want to talk about is called the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia is the hub. The hub is where we connect all this. So in the middle of our brain, there's a little circular part, and it's really cool. And in this basal ganglia, that hub connects all the parts. It connects the frontal lobe, the hippocampus, the prefrontal, the amygdala, and it says, oh, all this stuff is coming in, and the basal ganglia sorts it out, and then the basal ganglia then, okay, after it connects all parts of the brain, it looks for habits. Oh, what do I do if this happens? Oh, what do I do? And so then it may be a certain habit. It's like, oh, well, if I see a bear coming, oh my gosh, what do I do? The basal ganglia, we sort it, we go back to the working memory, what are my options? We go back to the long-term memory, what are my associations? And so, what does the basal ganglia do? If it's a habit, then you just know what to do. But if it requires thought, then the basal ganglia sends it back to the frontal lobe. It thinks through it. It looks at the hippocampus, okay, and it looks at all the long-term memories, what do we have to associate with this? And then it goes to the amygdala and says, hey, what do we need to do? And the prefrontal lobe with the emotions says, what information are we getting? And then the basal ganglia just keeps that circle going all the time. The cool thing is it's in milliseconds. 1,000ths of a second, things are thinking that fast. So as your brain goes, the basal ganglia connects all of these, and then we begin to make decisions, which then in turn make reactions. Let me make sure I stand in front of this board a little bit here. Let me make sure you've got all of this, okay? Let me make sure you've got all this. Once again, we talked about classical conditioning. Now we added operant conditioning to this test. And then the 5 parts of the brain associated with psychology, frontal lobe, hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and basal ganglia. Now, test number 5 isn't a real long test, though. I hope to see a lot of really good grades out there. And we'll see you for test number 6. Have a great week.